Hello everybody, it's Luke McBain, today with Vincent van Gogh. Van Gogh in Dutch, in German Van Gogh. We're gonna go with the American version of this, Van Gogh. It doesn't do him justice, of course, but we'll stick with that for a moment and look at his letters in this podcast. I became interested in his letters because of this gentleman here, Andrei Tarkovsky. Also did a video about his book Sculpting in Time, which I think is extremely important when it comes to leadership, because there's so much similarities to what Tarkovsky says about art and what actually constitutes leadership. So this should be actually a standard book in terms of teaching people about leadership. And what really struck me as important was when he said an artist has to have morals, has to have ethics, has to have values to do art. So it has to believe in these values. And this aspect of believing in values and adhering to those values is, of course, central to leadership. Everybody knows that. So without values, you don't have anything. So that sort of surprised me that Tarkovsky made this claim. It was, I have to admit, was new to me that values are also so important in art. And so I thought, well, if that's the case, then perhaps we'll just look at some values of a specific artist and see how they translate into the art itself. And is that really visible? And the best way, I think, to do that is actually let the artist speak for himself, which he does here in his letters to his brother and to his friends, and see what he believes in and see how that plays a role in his life, but also his paintings. So we're going to look at some of his paintings. Again, I'm not a Van Gogh expert. I'm not able also to go through the whole book and all his letters. I'm just going to read some passages, and then we're going to look at some of his painting and see how those values then create the art at hand. And I think it's important because that again shows that leadership is a form of art, and that much can be learned from how art is being produced, how artists are being educated and trained. So basically that could be also, all of that could be used for leadership development once we sort of wrap our heads around that and say, yes, leadership is actually an art form to transform the unknown into the known, exactly what artists do. This one is a great artist. Look at his paintings if you get the chance to do that. I was very fortunate and saw some of these paintings in the original. But let's have a look at now what Vincent van Gogh or Van Gogh says or writes to his brother. Most of his letters are to his brother, and we'll start in a phase of his life when actually he has not yet planned to become a painter. And I think that is a very interesting phase because here he postulates some of his beliefs and values which later on play a great role. So I think also that's a strong indicator that yes, values are translated into art. They play a major role in what the artist does, because again, he didn't come up with that he said, oh, now I'm going to be a painter, now I believe in these and these and these things. And also, yeah, so that's very interesting. Anyone who leads an upright life and experiences real difficulty and disappointment, and yet is not crushed by them, is worth more than one for whom everything has always been plain sailing, and who has known nothing but relative prosperity. For who are the most obviously superior of us? Those who merit the words, "Laborers, your life is bleak. Laborers, your life is full of suffering. Laborers, you are blessed." It is they who bear the marks of a whole life of struggle and labor borne unflinchingly. it is right to try to become like that. So we go on our way, by the grace of God, unwearied. So I think that there are several things to be noted here which become relevant for his art, and we will see them reflected in his art. The one idea again, that of poverty, that material riches don't really signify anything of which could indicate anything that is makes up the value of human life. On the contrary, it's more about work. So he says that those who work, especially work with their hands, not expecting anything and suffering through that process, is that what we should admire. So that has that quality of something noble. And the idea that you do this also unflinchingly. So whatever is being tossed in your way, whatever problems are being tossed in your way, you will bear that unflinchingly. So these qualities is something that Van Gogh absolutely admired. And later on we will also see that, of course, that was also a cross he would take upon himself within his struggle to do his art. So he lived most of his life in abject poverty, hardly selling anything, and mainly also, well, to the end of his life, he became more and more recognized, but at the beginning of his career, basically sidelined, marginalized, derided for his work. So in a strange way, also here he projects even forward his own suffering in life, and how he has to bear that to do what he believes in. I must continue to follow the path I take now. If I do nothing, if I study nothing, if I cease searching, then woe is me, I am lost. That is how I look at it. Keep going, what may. But what is your final goal, you may ask? That goal will become clear, will emerge slowly but surely, much as the draft turns into the sketch and the sketch into the painting, through the serious work done on it, through the elaboration of the original vague idea, and through the consolidation of the first fleeting and passing thought. What I find interesting here in terms of leadership, again, is this question of action, of doing something, which he finds central. He says, again, I'll repeat, keep going, come what may. So his idea is that the continuous struggle through life, the continual action through life, is meaningful in itself. And this is also what I postulate very often, that it's a question of acting, and acting is better than not acting. And through acting, this is how meaning is being produced. So in positions of leadership, the meaning is produced when you act in face of what you don't know, and show your values by that action. And and through these actions, slowly but surely, the future then is being revealed, just as he reveals the nature of his painting. So you have exactly the same analogy, you have the metaphor for what constitutes leadership in the words of an artist. And so I go on like an ignoramus, one who knows just one thing. Within a few years, I must have done a certain amount of work. I don't need to rush, for there is no point in that. But I must carry on working in complete calm and serenity, as regularly and with as much concentration as possible, as much to the point as possible. The world concerns me only as so far that I owe it a certain debt and duty, so to speak. Because I have walked this earth for 30 years, and out of gratitude would like to leave some memento in the form of drawings and paintings, not to please this school or that, but to express a genuine human feeling. He repeats he repeats here this notion of work, and also this notion that it takes a long time to produce anything meaningful. But on top of that, this again, these values of debt and duty, which apparently he places very high. So he feels indebted to his own existence, and also he feels his duty is to do something, to try to achieve something. There's a letter in which he writes about technique, and I found it interesting because, again, it says something about his values, what was important to him, what he actually wanted to achieve, and how that is also expressed in his paintings. One of the problems he had was that he didn't have a lot of formal training. You can actually see that when you look at his first drafts, and he was criticized for that. Plus, he didn't have a lot of money, which meant he couldn't pay models to sit for him to practice and really develop his technique. Now, what did he answer? I shan't enter into generalities concerning technique, but I certainly foresee that as I gain more of what I shall call expressive force, people will say not less, but even more than they do now that I have no technique. But for now, the second part of the question. Suppose a man has something to say and says it in a language in which his audience too is at home. Time and again we shall find that the speaker of truth lacks oratorical style and does not appeal to the greater part of his audience. Indeed, is scorned as a man of slow of tongue and despised as such. He can count himself lucky if he can edify just one, or at the best, a very few, with what he says, because those few are not interested in oratorical tirades, but positively listen out for the true, useful, necessary content of the words, which enlighten them, broaden their minds, make them freer or more intelligent. I'm determined, even when I shall be much more master of my brush than I am now, to go on telling people that I cannot paint. Okay, one could say, well, he's turning a weakness into a strength, right? But there's something in terms of also, if you translate that again to leadership, and he translates it, for example, to public speaking, right? He says there's technique and there's the underlying message, or there's the underlying intent and what you want to bring across. And he calls his own intent expressive force. So he really believes that it's more important what you have to say than how you will say it. And of course, if you know how you will say it, it makes it more appealing. And maybe the person can make it more vivid. And this is interesting if you again look at this, question, and within leadership and management, the question of what is rational decision and what is value-based thinking, or what is intuitive thinking, and how do those two sides balance each other out. So what is technique? What rational patterns have you learned in your career or in your study program? Doesn't matter what it is. And what values are you pursuing? What are you trying to express through that? And the second part is extremely important for everybody in life to figure that out. What are you trying to express through your profession, through your professional calling? It doesn't matter if you're a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer. And what are your values? So what are you trying to achieve? Because maybe you're trying to achieve to become the best possible lawyer, and your technique will become better and better. But that is not the part of your life which actually creates meaning. It's the part which you express through your values and where you try to combine one with the other. He is aware of that, but he decides consciously to say, I have to accept myself as I am. I'm not I don't excel at technique. I know that. I will never come to that point, and I embrace that because I can sense that there's something else I wish to express. And he follows that through. And he follows that through with all the difficulties it entails. There's a long pathway towards developing himself, giving himself a voice, becoming the artist, which he finally does become. So let's have a look if the what we just talked about, like all these values, these aspects which Van Gogh really deeply believed in, then manifest themselves in his work. And we'll have a look at the first painting, which is the Potato Eaters, and you'll see it now. I'll put it on screen so you can have a look at it. And this is what he says about the painting himself. The point is that I've tried to bring out the idea that these people eating potatoes by the light of their lamp have dug the earth with the same hands they are now putting into the dish, and it thus suggests manual labor and a meal honestly earned. I wanted to convey a picture of a way of life quite different from ours, from that of civilized people. So the last thing I would want is for people to admire or approve of it without knowing why. I've held the threads of this fabric in my hands all winter long and searched for the definite pattern. And although it is now a fabric of rough and coarse appearance, the threads have nonetheless been chosen with care and according to certain rules. And it might just turn out to be a genuine peasant painting. I know that it is, but anyone who prefers to have his peasants looking namby-pamby had best suit himself. Personally, I'm convinced that in the long run one gets better results from painting them in all their coarseness than from introducing a conventional sweetness. Painting peasant life is a serious business, and I, for one, would blame myself that I didn't try to make pictures that give rise to the serious reflection in those who think seriously about art and life. So, yes, what we already see here proven is actually, let's say, the values which Van Gogh believed in from the outset when he even was training to become a pastor. And so he carried these values on into his life as an artist and painter, which are those values of that to work without expectations and to work basically in the world of suffering is something very noble and is something very true. And especially to work with your hands. And if you look at the hands of the farmers in that picture, you will see that they are quite prominent. So that was really important to him. Also the expression in the faces. And all that he admired very much, these qualities of endurance, of hardship, of everyday work. So in this painting, it's quite clear that his values have become visible, that he has believed in them himself. And you can see also in the painting that the question of technique is not the central question of this painting. It's not a question of how well are the proportions of the figures in the painting, or how lifelike is it, and all these things do not really matter. It's what is being expressed here. What are the colors used? He himself describes it as something coarse, a coarseness, which again has that quality of the people who are depicted in that painting. So he tried to be as true to those people as he could, and give the painting a life of its own, something which has meaning. So and again, that's what can be seen quite clearly here, is this interconnection of values, actions, which is the painting itself, and then meaning which transpires from those actions and the art which is being created. And the same happens in leadership. It's exactly the same process. Values are put into action and into a result, and therefore also it becomes something meaningful also to others who are witnesses to that process. He spent some time with his brother in Paris and then returned to the countryside to continue working there. But when he was in Paris living with his brother, apparently he had, let's put it this way, he was out too much, he was with people too much, he was within this exciting city life and probably also out drinking a lot. So when he came back, that's also one of the reasons he went back to the countryside to be by himself, because that's where he could actually do some work. And he writes the following: "That mental exhaustion of mine is disappearing. I no longer feel so much need for diversion. I am less plagued by passions, am able to work more calmly. I could be alone without getting bored. I have come out of this feeling a little bit older, but no sadder. And sometimes one lacks the will to throw oneself back wholeheartedly into art and to regain one's capacity for it. One knows one is a cab horse, and that one is going to be hitched up to the same old cab again, and that one would rather not, and would prefer to live in a meadow with sunshine, a river, other horses for company, as free as oneself, and the act of procreation. We do not feel we are dying, but we do feel that in reality we count for little, and that to be a link in the chain of artists we are paying a high price in health, in youth, in liberty, none of which we enjoy any more than does the cab horse pulling the coachload of people out enjoying themselves in spring." So these are important statements. So he says he would rather, or wouldn't it be a much more pleasant life to be in a meadow with sunshine, a river, other horses for company, free as oneself, which basically was a life he had in Paris, one would assume. But it didn't do him really good. Like he came back, or he returned to the countryside exhausted. He had to basically detox from alcohol, and he felt again some calmness returning, like not being torn apart by passions or other interests. And we will see that this aspect that of being torn apart by passions or other interests which then divert you from your duty, which he describes actually like being a horse which is in front of a wagon which needs to be pulled uphill, is that which he must do. He feels a calling towards that duty. So there is this sense, he was actually also a passionate man, and he certainly enjoyed life, and you will see that in the next painting, but he had that also sense of duty that he must return to what he has to do in life. And in leadership, of course, you have that same sense at times that you have a duty which you must do, and a lot of people who have that responsibility feel like they're a horse in front of a cart which they pull uphill against all sorts of resistance. But it's just that what they must do. And of course, it would be much easier to actually indulge yourself in the diversions of life, in the entertainment of life, in all those things life has to offer. But it's a conscious decision not to actually sacrifice all those diversions and to focus on what life has in store for you. So he goes on to paint then a painting called The Night Cafe, which gives expression to that conflict of values. In my picture of the Night Cafe, I have tried to express the idea that the cafe is a place where one can destroy oneself, go mad or commit a crime. In short, I have tried, by contrasting soft pink with blood red and wine red, soft Louis XV green and Veronese green with yellow greens and harsh blue greens, all this in an atmosphere of an infernal furnace in pale sulfur, to express the powers of darkness in a common tavern, and yet under an outward show of Japanese gaiety and Tatarin's good nature. So there we go. You can clearly see um, within this painting of the night cafe what he's talking about. Um, Really, the how to say it, this diversion quality of life, that life can really capture you and keep you busy. And the Chinese have an interesting proverb. They say, may you have an interesting life. So, may your life be so interesting that you totally forget why you are being put on this earth, and what calling do you have. And that is why it is already some sort of this painting, some sort of furnace, some sort of form of special hell on earth, which is entertaining and pleasant, but really does not signify something meaningful. On the contrary, let's have another look at a painting where he says, actually Van Gogh himself says, this is the 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 pendant, or the opposite to the night cafe. Van Gogh always lived by himself in the countryside, but in many letters he asks his friend Gauguin to join him there, and he does for I think 9 weeks. And what is interesting, I found it very interesting that although he was always by himself painting, he didn't write to his brother in the terms of somebody being lonely or needing company. And it's a little bit puzzling why, or for me it was a little bit puzzling why he really wanted to form this artists commune and have other artists joining him. And for the longest time I thought, well, this guy's a little bit lonely. He wants to talk to his friends. He wants to have some company. But then it emerges in these letters, and I think all of these letters to his brother actually also show that quite clearly, that he cared deeply about other people. So he writes again and again how his suffering as an artist is nothing special, that he can see this also in other artists, that they are alone, they struggle, people don't believe in their work, and so he wants to do something for them. And what he wants them to experience, actually, he then also paints. He writes to Gauguin, "For we're trying once more to make it as easy as possible for you to come here soon. I must tell you that even while I'm working, I think continually about the plan of setting up a studio in which you and I will be permanent residents, but which both of us want to turn into a shelter and refuge for friends against the times when they find that the struggle is getting too much for them." Again, it's really moving that he writes about his own struggle, and he sees himself as this horse pulling this cart up the hill. But he also has a sense that others are not better off than he is, and that they must be experiencing the same struggle and the same doubts and the same marginalization and the same hardships in life, and that he would like to do something for them, and whatever he can do. He furnishes these rooms by himself, although he has hardly any money. He appeals for his friends to come and live with them and have this artists commune, and Gauguin also comes. When he paints the room he calls is actually also Vincent's bedroom. And he writes to his brother, "My dear Theo, I'm sending you a little sketch at long last to give you at least some idea of the direction my work is taking, because I feel quite well again today. My eyes are still tired, but I have a new idea all the same, and here the sketch of it. This time it's simply my bedroom. Only here everything depends on the color, and by simplifying it, I'm lending it more style, creating an overall impression of rest or sleep. In fact, look at the picture ought to rest the mind, or rather the imagination. The walls are pale violet, the floor is in red tiles, the blanket scarlet. The door is lilac, and that's all, nothing of any consequence in the shuttered room. The sturdy lines of the furniture should also express undisturbed rest. Portraits on the wall, and a mirror, and a hand towel, and some clothes. The frame, because there is no white in the picture, will be white. This is by the way of revenge for the enforced rest I had to take. I shall work on it again all day tomorrow, but you can see how simple the conception is. The shadows and the cast shadows are left out, and it is painted in bright flat tints like the Japanese prints. It will form a contrast to, for example, to the night cafe. And it's so touching that he really cares about his friends and about Gauguin, and that he wants him to be in this environment, in this special environment of happiness, of joy, and also of rest. So that was it. Couple of paintings by Van Gogh, and which just give a small insight into his work, and were just taken as an example of how Van Gogh expressed himself through his values into his paintings. So these the metaphor basically which you could take is that these values also exist within any human being which creates any sort of future. So the values which you embody and which you believe in actually are that which also then create your future, just like they created for Van Gogh his paintings, and then also become something very meaningful for others, just like the future which you create can become very meaningful for others. So I hope you enjoyed that a little bit, and see you in the next video.